This is Yair, Davidiy speaking to you from the land of Israel. We are continuing our discussion concerning the characteristics of Judah. By Judah we mean the tribe of Judah as distinct from the Jewish people. In the Bible the term Judah is applied to the whole of the Jewish people. That is, we have the tribes of Israel, 12 tribes of Israel. They divided into two different sections. The 10 tribes went to the north and were taken away by the Assyrians, and they lost consciousness of their ancestry. Nevertheless, the Bible speaks about them, and they will return in the end times, and at present they have a tough gig, they have a task in the present world to fulfill, and they're fulfilling it, and we have dedicated ourselves to finding where they are, or proving the whereabouts of whom and where they are today, or proving the identity and whereabouts of them today. And in addition to this, we should note that amongst them are to be found many descendants of Judah. Nevertheless, Judah in the Bible is identified with the Jewish people, because through the Jewish people, Judah gave expression to his tribal goal, to his tribal task, to his destiny as a tribe, to what had been predicted would befall him, and how that would come about. And we are discussing at the present certain characteristics of Judah, because this is interesting. This is part of our overall studies. It's worth knowing in its own right. And also may help people who are not certain to what tribe they belong to, even though they're sure inside themselves or through various proofs that they have or indications that they belong to the tribes of Israel. And they're searching for their own tribes. So no one knows for sure, but we can get a rough approximation. And so we are giving characteristics pertaining to Judah, because this will help anyone interested in going in this direction, and it is worthwhile in its own right. This is the second talk in this series. The first talk we analysed the aspects of Judah, certain aspects of Judah, and we also talked about what different tribes are found amongst the Jewish people, in addition to Judah, and we know that the name Judah means gratitude, acknowledgement. It indicates spiritual inclinations or proclivities. And we discussed the incident of Joseph selling Joseph, and also Tamar, when Judah had intercourse with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, and what that shows us about Judah. And we found Judah have certain qualities on the whole, that Judah is spiritually inclined. He is both rational and mystical. He is spiritually orientated, even when he is an atheist or agnostic. He cannot hide himself from this reality, from this aspect of existence. Judah acknowledges the truth. On the whole, we're speaking in relative terms. He has contrary inclinations, contrary pulls, one could say, in his personality. He is sometimes inclined to believe in things which are not rational, that are fantastic. On the one hand. On the other hand, when he sees the truth, he owns up to it and looks for the truth. He also owns up to his faults. Judah is often a leader. Judah values human life. Judah also values money. Judah sometimes expresses fraternity towards his fellow man, his fellow Jew, his peer, his associate, and at other times he doesn't. He also has these contradictory traits. So does everyone, but we're talking in relative terms. We also noted that Judah has leadership potential, that his sensitivity is sensitive, so is everyone sensitive to some degree, but he is inclined to be more sensitive than others, and he is also vulnerable. He is vulnerable because people dislike Jews for non-rational reasons. And so this aspect of vulnerability also restricts us in going into the faults and the lackings that Judah might have, because people who hate Jews are liable to interpret them in the wrong direction, in a wrong way, and you can count on it that is what they will do. And we also pointed out that even if Judah here and there has fallings down, and if he has things which you can say he's lacking, he is something wrong in his characteristics and so on, that this is only because one is only able to point to this because one is able to identify him. One is only able to identify Judah as a Jew because he or his ancestors refused to become anyone else. What does that mean, refuse to become anyone else? They refused to accept our God, who is not one God. They refused to deny the truth of the Bible. And this also shows an aspect of Judah of a stubbornness, of clinging to his principles, of standing up for what is right according to what he believes, and more than others. And even prepared to give his life and his happiness and everything he has for his principles. And this is exceptional. And this is something that Judah is noted for and should be appreciated for. So that any time you want to come and say that the Jews are this and the Jews are that, and the Jews are so-and-so, it is usually wrong. And even if you are inclined to think that there is some truth in it, you should realize that when it comes to the bottom line, one is only able to criticize Judah because Judah refused to be other than what he is. He refused not to belong to Judah. He is loyal to the fundamental principles of his existence. And there's a poem called "Where My Bosom Has Falsest Thou Deemest It to Be" by Lord George Gordon Byron, 1815, and this expresses it, and we will, it's a short poem, a few verses, and we will quote it because it's nice, and it's worth quoting. The poem says, "Where my bosom, that is my heart, where my bosom as false as thou deemst it to be," as you think it to be, "where my bosom as false as thou deemst it to be, I need not have wandered from far Galilee." Galilee is the north of the land of Israel, where many of the Jews lived before the destruction of the Second Temple. It was but abjuring my creed to her face. What does it mean, abjuring my creed to her face? Denying my belief to her face, to wipe away the curse which thou sayest is a crime of my race. I'll repeat that. It was but abjuring my creed to her face. The curse which you sayest is a crime of my race. If people say that Jews are cursed, so someone who belongs to Judah, who is a Jew, all he needs to do is deny the Jewish faith and he becomes a Gentile, in the eyes of the Gentile, in most cases, until recently at least. Nevertheless, it doesn't work that way. They have not done so. If the bad never triumph, then God is with thee. If the slave only sin, thou art spotless and free. The exile on earth is an outcast and high. Live on in your faith, but in mine I will die. So this brings us to another point that we should go into at another time. But relatively speaking, the Jews have not been cursed. The Jews have actually been blessed in compared to other peoples, in comparison to the peoples amongst whom they lived, and in comparison when you take into consideration the historical circumstances. But here and there in history there have been periods when the Jews have been severely persecuted and oppressed, and if you emphasize these bad times, then you might get a distorted picture, because on the whole the Jews have been better off. Nevertheless, taking it in its worst case scenario, taking the worst times, then the poet is saying that, okay, fair enough. If you want to say that someone who has had a hard time, who's oppressed, is a bad person, you're right. Keep thinking that way. But I believe in God Almighty, I believe in the Bible, and I will continue to do so. And in the end times, the Almighty will make a reckoning with me, according as he sees fit. And he continues, the poet continues, I lost without faith more than thou canst bestow. It is true. The Jews, by ceasing to be Jews, were often offered very favourable conditions to become Christians, and they refuse to do so. I have lost without faith more than thou canst bestow, as the God who permits thee to prosper does know. That is, if the Gentiles are also getting on well, is because God has blessed them for his own reasons. God has allowed them to do so. In his heart, that is in the heart of God, is my heart and my hope, and in thine the land and the life which for him are resigned. So the poem is talking about the situation before the land of Israel, before the creation of the land, of the state of Israel, when it was in the power of the Gentiles to help the Jews return to their land, and the British eventually did that. So that is what the poet says, and it's worth considering. We're now continuing with our analysis of the characteristics of Judah. One of the stories concerning Judah involves Joseph. We saw how Judah was responsible for sending Joseph down into Egypt. He suggested that they sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites, to the caravan was passing by, and because of that Joseph went down into Egypt. In Egypt, Joseph was sold as a slave. From there he eventually came up. He progressed to become the effective ruler of the country. There was a famine in Egypt and in all that region, perhaps in all of the world. And this famine Joseph had predicted, and he prepared Egypt for it. He had stored up food in granaries. When the famine hit Egypt and hit the rest of the area, everyone from all around came to Egypt to buy grain. And meanwhile, Jacob and his sons, that is the 11 sons, apart from Joseph, were still in the land of Canaan, and they too were suffering from famine because the famine had hit their area. And so Jacob sent his sons down to Egypt to buy grain. He kept out of his 11 sons, one of them was Benjamin. Benjamin was the son of Rachel. Rachel gave birth to Joseph and to Benjamin, and she died in birth. Rachel had been the favourite wife of Jacob. Jacob was attached to the sons of Rachel, to Joseph and to Benjamin. Joseph had disappeared, he had apparently been killed, or so they believed. And only Benjamin was left. And Jacob apparently was old at the time, and he was attached, severely devoted to Benjamin, because this was all he had left of his favourite wife, Rachel. And so Jacob refused to let Benjamin go down with the brothers, but he sent the rest of them, the 10 brothers, down into Egypt. In Egypt they came before Joseph, because Joseph was in charge of the granaries, and he would have met up with most foreign buyers who came from outside the country, because it was in the interest of the country to know which peoples from outside were coming to them, which foreigners had need of them. And then he saw the sons of Jacob come into him and to ask for grain. He learnt of it. He also recognized them as to who they were. They did not recognize him. They did not recognize Joseph as to who he is. And this is conceptually acceptable, because when someone does not realize the possibility that a person standing before him is a person he is familiar with, if this is an impossibility according to his trend of thought, he will not recognize the person, even when the person is standing before him. And this is after Joseph had been shaved and dressed up as an Egyptian, and was an administrator of Egypt. So they did not recognize Joseph for who he was, but Joseph knew them. And so Joseph questioned them. He accused them of being spies, but then he agreed to let them go. But he said that they could only come back if they bring Benjamin with them. In the meantime, he arrested Simeon. He incarcerated Simeon. He kept Simeon back, and he sent the other brothers home. The brothers came home and told Jacob what had happened. And Jacob and told Jacob what had happened, and then later they devoured the grain. The supply of grain was eaten up. They needed more. And so they said to Jacob that we have to go back to Egypt to buy more, and Jacob refused because he did not want to let Benjamin go. And Reuben, who was the firstborn son, even said, you can kill my 2 sons, have my 2 sons as hostages, as if to say, and put them to death if I do not bring Benjamin back with you, with us. But we have to go to Egypt, and we have to take Benjamin with us in order to be able to buy grain to keep us and our families alive. Even so, Jacob refused. After a while, the situation continued to worsen, and so Judah said to Jacob, I will guarantee Benjamin from me. You may request him, responsibility for him, only let us go down. This is what he said in Genesis 43 verse 8. And Judah said to Israel his father, Israel is another name for Jacob, he said to his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I myself will be surety for him. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. So Jacob allowed them to go down, and they went down to Egypt with Benjamin. And when they met up with Joseph framed them. He made it out as if Benjamin had stolen his chalice, his cup, his favourite cup. Apparently maybe it was embossed with jewels. Apparently it was worth something, and he accused Benjamin of stealing it. He gave the brothers grain, and he told them to go back to their families, but he said that Benjamin would have to stay with him and serve as a slave. And then Judah came up and he confronted Joseph. He pleaded before him. He both confronted him and he pleaded with him, Benjamin, let me serve as a slave in his place. And consequently, when Joseph saw this, heard this, he broke down and revealed to the brothers who he was, and they were reconciled with each other. Genesis 44, beginning from verse 30, it says, this is what Judah is speaking to Joseph. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with me that he will die. So your servants will bring down the grey hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant, that is Judah, myself, Judah, for your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that will become upon my father? So here we have an incident that reveals additional characteristics of Judah, or emphasizes characteristics that we have noticed. Judah is a person who takes responsibility. He's prepared to carry it through no matter what the consequences are. When it is important to him, when he believes in something, he goes ahead with it. He goes with it to the end. And he has a concern with others. He is concerned with the welfare and the feelings of other people. And he is prepared to devote himself to a higher cause and to sacrifice himself. And we shall return to this matter. We should also note that Jews have a messianic complex, that is, they want to do good, to save the world, to help others, and they devote themselves to all kinds of causes, and sometimes they are misguided, but nevertheless they have, on the whole, good intentions, or intentions that are not to be denigrated, and they often rise to the top in all kinds of reform movements and reform activities, partly because they have this quality of self-dedication, of involving themselves fully and selflessly. And so this, through this quality and other factors, they often become leaders of all kinds of revolutionary movements and do good bodies and reform organisations, which sometimes, in some cases, are valuable and do valuable work, and in other times, in other There are also times when they are negative, misguided, but that is the way things are. And this is something that we have to acknowledge and look and live with, because this is what there is. We shall continue our analysis of the characteristics of Judah. May the Lord God of Israel bless you. Thank you.